Why, hello there, and welcome to another My Little Pony fanfiction reading with me, a random guy from the internet. Today, we'll be reading Who We Are by Kits. Now, it's important to mention this is a very long story, which means there's probably going to be multiple parts to this. I'm thinking two, but there could very well be more, so don't you worry your pretty little heads. I'll get it done. So it's 18,000 words, roughly. 53 pages on Microsoft Word. So, no, 56! Jesus Christ. Okay, let's get started. Oh, one more thing. There is a little bit of shipping in this story, so if that's not your thing, you can go away and not listen to this. And me, myself, I don't really like shipping, especially when it comes to the main six. It's like, I don't like shipping in MLP whatsoever. It's not that prevalent to the main story, but there's still the element of shipping there, so, fair warning. Alright, I'll begin now. Chapter 1, Who We Are. Whoa! Rainbow Dash stumbled as a giggling Pinkie Pie spun her around. The blindfold robbing her of her sight, and the jerky motions of the Earth Pony conspired to make staying upright more than a minor task. Remember, Pinkie, she needs to be spun in a circle about 6 times, Twilight helpfully supplied. The goal is to disorient her. Yeah, make sure you get her nice and dizzy, Pinkie, AJ said, not trying to hide her amusement as Dash nearly tripped over her own hooves again. Hey, watch it! Dash bit off her complaint as she forced to concentrate on untangling her legs before she ended up on the floor. Oh my, Fluttershy said, peeking out from behind her mane as Pinkie began to spin Rainbow faster and faster. The shy pony's eyes began to spin in sympathy, and she had to look away. Don't you think that's enough, dear? Rarity asked. Nope, chirped Pinkie Pie. Pinkie Pie, I don't think I can... What Rainbow Dash couldn't do was never revealed. At that moment, Pinkie slammed into the Pegasus, stopping her spin cold and wrapping her forelegs around the blindfolded pony's neck. She pressed her lips against Dash's, swaying with her girlfriend as Rainbow stumbled from the sudden assault. Applejack rolled her eyes at the couple. Why don't y'all get a room? She teased. Pinkie broke from her kiss to giggle, leaving Dash gasping for breath and listing to the left slightly. Silly, this is my room, she said while bending around to plunge her muzzle into her curly tail. After a second or two, she found the object she'd been searching for and pulled out a small blue ponytail with a large pin in the top. Here you go, she said as she carefully pressed the blunt end of the pin into Rainbow's mouth, stealing another kiss. Giggling, she lined the Pegasus up with a cartoony drawing of a pony that lacked a tail, and with a good luck, Dashy, pushed her off towards the poster. Struggling to keep moving in a straight line, Dash stumbled towards the tailless pony. Her friends called out all manner of conflicting directions, which she did her best to ignore. Under the blindfold, her brows knit together, and she struggled against the waves of dizziness. She leaned forward slowly. Without the spinning, Rainbow was a good enough judge of distance. She had to be, or she would have become Equestria's coolest pancake by now. That she was able to stop just before she walked right into the wall. Even with the dizziness, it was more a matter of walking in a straight line instead of a crooked one. The pin in her mouth touched the wall as she leaned forward only a few inches further than she thought she needed to be. The suggestions from her friends redoubled in volume. Even Fluttershy hazarded up a weak up. She ignored them all, tuning them out like she did when she performed particularly difficult stunts. Deciding that she had veered slightly to the left of the target, she moved the pin and pressed it in. The intake of breath from the other 5 ponies was all she needed to smile triumphantly. Slipping the blindfold up, she prepared to bask in the glory of her own awesomeness. She smirked and puffed out her chest as her eyes uncovered to see her near-perfect placement. If this pin were the mustache of a pony. The other 5 ponies broke the silence with their laughter as Dashy sighed and rolled her eyes. Yeah, laugh it up. Rainbow gestured to the pair of purple and yellow tails decorating the wall and the orange tail that had fallen on the floor. At least mine's on the pony. My turn! Pinkie leaped extra high as Rainbow finished removing the blindfold. "Gee, hold still!" Dash said between her clenched teeth as she struggled to get the cloth around her girlfriend's head. With a giggle, Pinkie stopped bouncing, but she never quite achieved what most ponies could call still. The mare swayed and bobbed slightly, even with all four hooves planted firmly on the floor. Another giggle, followed by a snort as Dash finally secured the blindfold. "Payback time!" Dash whispered, elicting another series of high-pitched laughs. Then Dash began to spin Pinkie around. "Woo!" shouted Pinkie. The pink mare had no problems managing her hooves despite the rough way her girlfriend was shoving her. "That sounds sexual!" Continuing. Turning to Twilight, Applejack smirked. "Bet your lunch Pinkie beats RD," she said, idly tossing an apple into the air. "You're on, Applejack!" Twilight grinned. She closed her eyes and tilted her chin up slightly. "Rainbow Dash's balance and athleticism give her a major advantage when it comes to—" Rarity and Fluttershy's gasps drew her attention back to the party game just in time to see Dash nuzzle a beaming Pinkie Pie. The pink tail firmly pinned into the crayon pony's cutie mark was all the explanation she needed. Applejack opened her mouth, a taunt ready to be directed at Twilight, but the sound of the front door being slammed open cut her off before she could begin. Every pony's attention was drawn towards the stairway as they heard someone scampering up it. A second or two later, a gasping Spike crested the landing. The young dragon was panting, sweat running down his face as he paused for a few breaths. "Spike?" Twilight half shouted. She wasn't sure what calamity could bring her assistant running, so it seemed, all the way from the library. At the sound of her voice, Spike looked up at her. Sprinting the remaining distance, he slid to a stop in front of his caretaker. Proffering a scroll, he gasped out, "Letter from the princess! It's super important!" Okay, this is something I don't understand. I mean, Spike, what is he to Twilight? I mean, you have all these fan fictions that say basically, Spike's like Twilight's assistant, or he's like her son or her brother, or all this weird shit, and I never understood that. Levitating the curled scroll out of his grasp and summoning a cup of punch from Pinkie's snack table for the exhausted dragon, Twilight examined the message. The wax seal of Equestria, seldom used for her correspondence with her teacher, was unbroken, and the word "super important" was penned just below it. A prickling sensation ran up the back of her neck, causing her to tense, and her eyes grew a little wider. Twilight frowned as she looked to her friends. Each of them were staring at the letter, no doubt remembering the last time a missive marked like this had been received. That time they had ended up battling a veritable deity of chaos and nearly lost themselves in the process. Wasting no more time, she snapped at the seal, unfurled the scroll, and began to read aloud. "My most faithful student." Some of the tension on their back eased. The letter concerning Discord had started with no such preamble. "I have been putting off sending this missive for several hours now. I do not mean to cause you or your friends distress, but the investigation concerning the changeling attack on Canterlot has turned up some news that I feel you all deserve to know." Twilight stopped reading to look at her friends again, all leaning forward, hanging on her words. Even Spike, still breathing hard, was staring up at her wrapped in fascination. She cleared her throat and continued. "Many who suspected the changelings of having agents in place before the attack have been proven correct. Some letters were found amongst the impostors' belongings that confirm this. While this may be of interest to you on an academic level, the reasons for this letter are directly concerned to you and your friends. One of the letters is a report of such an agent. While badly damaged, it details how he tracked the different agent, who had been out of contact for years, to a small, unremarkable village. The letter specifically refers to her as a national hero." Twilight's pupils became pinpricks as her voice trailed off in disbelief, as the next phrase passed her lips. "As one of the elements of harmony." Twilight's magic winked out and the letter fell to the floor. She watched it fall as her mind reeled at the news. Stumbling a step from the letter, and then from another one, she remembered her friends. Her gaze took all of them in. Fluttershy was curled up, lay shivering on the floor. Her mane hid most of her face, but her one visible eye was closed tight. She was biting her lip as she trembled. Rarity had fainted backwards onto Pinkie Pie's bed. While Rarity was prone to over-dramatizations, this time Twilight felt the reaction was warranted. Applejack stood stock still. Her face was slack, seemingly devoid of emotion except for her eyes, which were as wide as Twilight's own. Rainbow Dash had been hovering above the floor when Twilight had started to read. Now she was lying in a heap next to Pinkie Pie. For her part, her hostess was sitting back on her haunches, otherwise still. Normal pony still, no bouncing or restless shifting. She was frozen in terror. Her friends, the ponies that meant more than anything to her, now knew her darkest secret. She had feared that this day would come ever since her kin had attacked the wedding. When no sign of suspicion had shown, she had relaxed, secure in the knowledge that she would remain in Ponyville. She had forgotten. The thought of fleeing and leaving her friends had been more than she could take. She had wanted to forget. Now they knew, Twilight knew, and that pony would not stop until she had been unmasked. Summoning every last shred of willpower, she put a stop to these spinning thoughts. There would be time to think, to panic later. If she wanted that time, she would have to make it through tonight. Even if that meant consciously manipulating her friends. Even if the very thought made her ill. It would be the hardest impersonation she had ever done. Acting like herself. Twilight was consciously aware of how dry her mouth was. Most of her mind was still consumed by sheer shock of this news. One of her friends was a changeling? A lump of ice had formed in her chest, and it grew larger as she considered each in turn. All of them seemed shocked and dismayed too. "No!" Rainbow Dash said as she picked herself off the floor, all the attention in the room focused on her. "No! You read it wrong, Twilight!" She bent around to smooth a feather misplaced by her fall. When she once again faced Twilight, her mouth was set in a tight frown and her brows furrowed as she glared daggers at the unicorn. "None of us could possibly be an enemy!" "But Princess Celestia—" "No!" Dash spat as her wings flared. Pinkie placed a hoof gently on Dash's withers, which the Pegasus shrugged off without even looking. "I refuse to believe it!" Dash's eyes flashed as her voice took on a hard edge. "It's just a trick!" "Simmer down now, R.D." Applejack shot Dash a glare of her own as she gently prodded Rarity. "There ain't no cause to be yelling at Twilight. She's just reading the princess's letter." Turning a questioning gaze to the unicorn, Applejack asked, "Are you sure it's from the princess?" Offered this as a glimmer of hope, Fluttershy peeked out from behind her mane. Twilight's horn lit up once more and a magenta field sprang into being around the letter. After a moment, the seal began to blink as a pale yellow light. This chair is squeaky. After a moment, the seal began to blink a pale yellow light. "It's genuine, all right," Twilight announced, tasting ash in her mouth. A pop and a whiz drew every pony's attention, including Rarity's, to Pinkie. She had a noisemaker in her mouth, and a double hoofful of confetti rained all around her. "Why are you standing around with pouts on your snouts? This is supposed to be a party—" "Pinkie Pie!" Rarity snapped as she rolled back onto her hooves. "Now is not the time." Fluttershy and Applejack nodded their assent. Even Spike glared at her. Pinkie blushed under a disapproving gaze of her friends and stooped to scoop up a small pile of scattered confetti. "I'll just—" She stammered up and scooted behind Rainbow Dash. "Save this for later, then." "So, Fluttershy said through her mane as she glanced at each of the ponies in the room. "This means that one of us is a changeling?" She looked up at her hooves again as she fidgeted. "Sure looks that way," said AJ as she helped the timid Pegasus to her hooves. Dash's face screwed up and she snorted, "Maybe. Just maybe." "I don't care much for it none neither, R.D., but the princess wouldn't lie about something so serious." Applejack glanced at Twilight. "Right?" "She does like to play small pranks on ponies from time to time," Twilight allowed, "but they're always small and never serious. And if you cannot trust the princess, who can you trust?" Rarity flipped her mane with a hoof. You can always trust your friends! Dash's wings flared as she hopped into a low stance. Her legs spread wide. She stalked towards Rarity. We can trust each other! Applejack stepped in front of Rarity, blocking Dash. Except one of us ain't who she says she is. Please, Fluttershy whimpered, don't shout. Okay, this part's a little weird because there's a sequence of dialogue, but it doesn't exactly say who's reading, so I'm just going to read ahead a little bit and try to get the right voices where they should be. And if I get it wrong, well, that's too bad. So, I'll try to get this right. Just what are you saying, Applejack? Oh, this is the worst possible thing! I ain't saying nothing. Why are you being so defensive? If every pony could just stop yelling? Girls, I think we need to approach this calmly and rationally. Princess Celestia would... Can it, Twilight? The princess flipped her feathers if she thinks... My dear, one does not simply talk about royalty in such a vulgar man! Come on, read! My dear, one does not simply talk about royalty in such a vulgar... Fuck. What's wrong with me? My dear, one does not talk about royalty in such a vulgar manner. You can shut up, too! Princess Celestia is... Now don't you talk to her that way! Oh, please, stop yelling. Please. She started it! No, you did! No. I don't know who's reading! This is crazy. Okay. Oh, please stop yelling. Please? She started it. No, you did! No. Quiet! Pinkie shouted, drowning out the argument. All eyes turned towards her. The normally energetic mare was sitting up on her haunches, rooted up in place. Her eyes cast down towards the floor. She neither bounced nor swayed. Why are you fighting? She sniffed, tears welling up in her eyes. We're all friends, and parties are supposed to be fun. Her hair seemed to lose some of its volume as she talked. I know sometimes fun can be loud, but this is screamy loud, not cheery loud. Dash was at her side in an instant, nuzzling the distraught mare. Pinkie burrowed her face in Dash's short mane, small jerk shaking her body. Rainbow's eyes narrowed as she carefully maneuvered to take in the other four with her hostile gaze. That's it! Party's over! She said. She gestured with a hind leg towards the stairs as she wrapped her wings around her sobbing girlfriend. We'll pick this up tomorrow when you guys are thinking straight. But, all four of them began. The gaze Dash leveled at them could cut steel. When she spoke, she was clipped and short. Her tone dared any of them to argue. Just for a second. Get out! She commanded, her teeth clicking together as her eyes flashed. Applejack looked ready to take her up on her challenge, but Rainbow gave her a double dose of her glare, and the farmer thought better of provoking the Pegasus further. All right, then. The reflection of the party lights, themselves so warm and inviting, became a very thing of menace as Rainbow's eyes further narrowed. Applejack fought down the urge to gulp as she turned and walked hurriedly down the stairs, trying not to look rushed. Fluttershy, Rarity, and Spike followed without argument, the latter still nursing his punch. My computer's making weird sounds. I just hope it isn't going into the microphone. Okay, let us continue. As the others left, Dash turned her attention to the mare, still clinging to her neck. Her expression softened, all hints of anger and promises of violence had disappeared. She stroked Pinkie's mane with the care she might have had for sculptures made of hardened sugar. Sculptures made of hardened sugar. The fucker, what? What does that mean? Sculptures made of hardened sugar. I've never heard of that. If that's a thing... Okay, whatever. Gently, she nuzzled and hugged the other mare. Twilight lingered near the top of the stairs. Rainbow, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this. Without turning away from Pinkie Pie, without lifting her head or shifting a wing, Dash answered her, her voice filled with weariness seldom heard from the energetic Pegasus. It's not your fault, Twilight, but tomorrow. Please? Twilight wanted to go comfort Rainbow. She would have stayed to try to help Dash without being too obvious about it. But the Pegasus was too busy being strong for Pinkie, and would likely only repeat her demand, Twilight leave. "Tomorrow, then," she said as she trotted down the stairs. "You okay, Pinks?" Pinkie sniffled. "Yeah, Dashy, I'm just peachy. Or maybe, like, plummy." Dash let out a sharp laugh. "Okay, you're almost making sense. What's up? Don't tell me this changeling thing's gotten to you." Pinkie's mane rubbed against Dash's neck as she shook her head. "Every pony's so angry. You and Applejack and Twilight." Dash continued to hold Pinkie, waiting for her to continue. It took several long moments before Pinkie's breath no longer shuddered from repressed sniffles. "You." Her voice was calm, regaining much of the high... Can you hear the squeakiness of this fucking chair? God damn it! This chair is squeaky. I'll restart. "You." Her voice was calm, regaining much of the high-pitched cheer. Her voice was calm, regaining much of the high-pitched cheer was usually embellished with. "You really seemed upset about how maybe one of your friends is a little different on the outside than you thought. Like, you wouldn't be her friend even if she was black and had holes in her legs." Pinkie's face fell into a frown. "You would still, right?" "Can we not talk about this now?" Sure, Rainbow." Pinkie slipped out from the hug to look at Rainbow Dash in the eyes. "If you can promise me one thing." "Anything for you, Pinkie. You know that." "Can you try not to hate her, whoever she is?" Dash's eyes narrowed. Part of the anger she had been directed at Applejack returned to her eyes. "So you do think one of us is a bad guy?" "No!" Pinkie shook her head. "But you didn't want to talk about it, right?" Yeah." Dash glanced away. "Can we just not think about that tonight?" "Sure thing, Dashy," Pinkie chirped as her voice slowly gaining back to its normal sugary tone. "Oh!" she gasped. "Maybe we could play a board game or read a story. I know I have a new awesomery comic around here somewhere." "Yeah, Pinkie," Rainbow grinned. "Let's do that." Dash moved off towards the chest Pinkie kept their together games in. Ooh, they're together games. How intriguing. "And then we can have a sleepover, just the two of us. Yay!" Dash chuckled. "Come on, Pinks, you know I have to clear the clouds at sunrise. If I stay here, we'll be up all night playing games." Rainbow glanced over her shoulder to see Pinkie sticking her tongue out. Yeah, don't worry. I'll be back in time for pancakes." Wait, who's talking? Oh, that's Rainbow Dash. Shit. Oops. I'll do that again. Yeah, don't worry. I'll be back in time for pancakes." "Yay, pancakes!" Pinkie hopped in place. "I'll make them super extra scrumptious." Dash snorted. "As if you could ever not make awesome pancakes." She reached into the chest and found out a beat-up copy of Daring Do and the Voodoo Crew, Issue 1. How's this one?" she said around the small book. "Oh, that's my favorite!" Dash rolled her eyes. "You say that about everything, Pinkie." "That's 'cause it's true!" Pinkie bounced over to a cushion positioned in front of the fireplace and settled into it. "As long as you're the one reading it, it'll always be my favorite." Beyond the bakery's doorway, Twilight heard heated voices. She was unable to make out exactly what was being said, but she had little doubt she would find Applejack and Rarity arguing in the middle of the street as Fluttershy tried to alternatively stay out of it or break the two apart. As she pushed the door open, her suspicions were confirmed. "I ain't saying that one of y'all wouldn't be one of them changelings, but I don't think the princess would joke about something so serious." Applejack was glaring at Rarity. "And I ain't inclined to think some pony who ain't a pony is gonna be too happy about the rest of us finding out." Rarity glared at Applejack. "And I thought you needn't brought up such a horrifying prospect right before Fluttershy and I were about to go to sleep. There is simply no way I will ever get my rest now. And I say you needn't brought up such a horrifying prospect right before me and Fluttershy were about to go to sleep. There is simply no way I will ever get my rest now." Fluttershy for her part hunkered down, wings and tail pulled in tight.
Consarn it, Rarity! What's going on?
Twilight interrupted. 3 sets of startled eyes turned towards her. Clearing her throat, Rarity spoke up first.
Applejack was just regaling us with the most horrific tale. I was not.
The Earth Pony stomped her front hooves.
All I'm saying is that we should have all stayed at Pinkie's. There ain't a Sunday's chance in summer of our little changeling friend trying nothing.
Fluttershy shivered and covered her eyes in her hooves. Eyes narrowing, Twilight glared at Applejack.
Thanks, AJ, she hissed.
Turning to face all of her friends, Twilight's voice softened and she said,
You're all welcome to stay with me back at the library. Thanks, Twi, but I gotta warn Mac and Granny about this. No!
Twilight tried not to shout. Applejack raised an eyebrow, but let herself be cut off.
We can't tell any pony about this,
she hissed, much quieter.
It would spread a panic.
Rarity's own brow furrowed in confusion.
My dear, surely you're not suggesting that we keep this from even our own families? What good would come of that? Aside from not having the entire town stare at us and having avoid us until we figure this out?
At Twilight's words, Fluttershy's eyes grew wide.
The entire town?
She began to quiver at the thought. Twilight moved to nuzzle at the shivering Pegasus before continuing.
And there's the issue of safety.
She jabbed a hoof at Applejack.
What about when you tell your family?
Applejack's eyes widened as she realized what Twilight was saying.
So any pony we tail, any pony who knows, might be in danger. I don't know, Applejack. Whoever she is, she hasn't hurt any of us yet. But...
Twilight let her rest go unsaid. Turning back to Fluttershy, she gave the mare another reassuring nuzzle.
Come on, Fluttershy, you can stay at the library tonight. Oh, I don't want to be a bother. I insist.
Twilight looked up at both Applejack and Rarity.
In fact, I insist you all stay. But Twilight,
Rarity whined. Applejack's jaw squared off as she prepared to argue with the purple unicorn.
It's quite simple. With you 3 under my eye, and Dash and Pinkie keeping an eye on each other, the changeling won't be able to act without revealing herself.
Applejack squared her jaw and narrowed her eyes. She was going to be stubborn about this again, Twilight knew. Internally, she debated how much it was really worth arguing with the farmer, and concluded that there wasn't any harm in letting any pony who wanted to go. Even if she was the changeling. A thought that she still couldn't wrap her mind around. The worst AJ would do is run away. Come to think of it, none of her friends really had the capacity to intentionally harm each other. Even Rainbow and AJ kept their scuffles to what both would have described as friendly.
You're right about not telling Mac and the rest, but there ain't no way I ain't leaving them unprotected tonight. And I have already promised that Sweetie Belle could stay over at the boutique tonight. I can't simply abandon her.
Twilight sighed.
All right. All right.
She looked about down at the kneeling mare.
What about you, Fluttershy? I suppose you need to look after your sick ferret or something.
Fluttershy shook her head.
Oh? So would you like to stay with me tonight?
Fluttershy nodded, meeting Twilight's eyes.
But,
she stammered quietly.
I need to make sure all the animals get fed tonight. And I absolutely positively have to get back early for their breakfast.
Fluttershy shuffled her front hooves as she looked away from Twilight.
Fluttershy,
Twilight said.
Do you want me to go with you?
The Pegasus nodded.
Well, okay.
Twilight's eyes narrowed in determination.
Fluttershy and I will go feed those animals, and you two will go home and sleep. Pinkie and Dash...
A pair of voices muffled but clearly in throes of laughter drifted down from above.
Will do whatever it is they do. And tomorrow, we'll get this whole problem sorted out. Sure thing, Twi. Of course we can, dear. Oh, that would be great.
With a final good night, the ponies parted ways. Twilight sighed and rolled over in bed, pulling the comforter tight around her shoulders. She had read and reread the letter until courtesy of her guest demanded she put out her light. There had been more. Celestia had ordered her to see the situation be resolved. Once again, she went over her spell, the one she used to strip the changelings of their disguise during the recent battle. She had thought of it immediately upon returning home, almost kicking herself not bringing it up at Pinkie's, but she was glad she hadn't. It wasn't a very gentle spell. Analyzing it had left too many uncertainties. The changelings that she had used it on certainly reverted back to their natural forms, but they'd also been struck senseless. Were it just a matter of knocking her friends out, she'd employ it as soon as she had her friends' consent. But there was more. The principle the spell worked on was reliant on turning unfamiliarity with a form against the shape changer. The changelings had assumed their forms immediately before attacking them. They were very unfamiliar with their new forms, so the spell had not required much power. Still, she'd knocked out a changeling who'd held the form for mere minutes. This changeling, according to the princess's letter, had held her form for years. The amount of magic required might seriously injure her, to say nothing about what it would do to her non-pony friends. For some reason, the thought of hurting the changeling bothered her immensely, far more than her reluctance to cause pain to any living creature would account for. Maybe she didn't really need to. Rolling over again, she snorted. Her brain was getting fuzzy again. A combination of shock on top of a late night was conspiring to inhibit her ability to think. She'd have to figure this out in the morning. Satisfied that she could not do anything more tonight, she closed her eyes and was asleep in seconds. She should leave, disappearing into the night, never to be seen again. A sharp ache formed in her chest at the thought. She didn't want to leave. The last few years had been the best of her life. Outweighing even her discovery of friendship was slipping out of her hooves. Besides, Twilight would chase her. They all would. She was good, that much she knew, and she could probably escape. But in the process, she knew her friends would grow to hate her, to despise her. That thought hurt worse than anything she imagined that she would endure in Celestia's dungeons. Even being banished to the moon was preferable to knowing that she was hated by her closest friends. Banishment only meant years wasting away, wallowing in loneliness with no point to love her, even if only by proxy. The hatred of her friends, experienced as only her race could, would kill her heart. She'd survive only in the most technical of terms, a hollow, broken shell. Chrysalis could have her then. There would be nothing left of her to torment. She could give herself up. Maybe by surrendering she could escape, at least, outright hate. The resentment, the loathing, the loneliness. Those would still follow, but it would be better than hatred. Maybe. A dark thought from her almost forgotten former life whispered into her mind. She could use her race's mind magic. There was more than enough love and support for her in Ponyville to do almost anything. To make them all forget. Bile binged at the back of her throat as she curled up into a ball in her bed, fighting back the urge to retch. How could she even imagine abusing her friends like that? She nearly fled right then. Even if there was the remotest possibility she'd hurt one of them like that, then she deserved the hate and scorn that would follow. She'd suffered 1,000,000 times over. She'd give herself to Chrysalis now. She couldn't change anything she'd done in the distant past, but she could refuse to treat any pony like that again. It was several long minutes before she could uncurl again without sicking up. She couldn't flee. She couldn't turn herself in. And she absolutely refused to prey on the ponies who trusted her. Faking her own death briefly crossed her mind. But that was absurd, and would only cause her friends pain and suffering. And at the end of the day, she'd be alone, and they wouldn't know if there was a changeling still in their midst. The only option that remained was the one that she yearned for all along. She could stay. She would probably get caught. Twilight would never stop digging at this, even if it took her entire life. But until she was discovered, she'd gain more precious memories, more time amongst the ponies who had meant more to her than anything, even her own future. A hopeful thought. The single bright light in the darkness. She might escape detection altogether. Were she in a normal changeling's predicament, she'd have no hope. Impersonating another was always tricky. Doubly so once it was known some pony had been replaced. Their abilities only extended to the surface. Color, shape, sound, cloning a personality was impossible, but she wasn't cloning any pony's personality at this time. While her coat was false and her cutie mark picked rather than granted, she had not played herself false. All of her emotions and reactions had been genuine. She didn't have to worry about being discovered by being caught on bad acting. She just had to be herself. Okay, there's dialogue here, but I don't know. Okay, the thing about this story is that... No, I'm not going to ruin it. Never mind. This is the changeling's thoughts. And there's a little bit of dialogue here. And at this time, you're not supposed to know who the changeling is. So I'm just gonna read. I'm just gonna read it in my voice. Okay.
Please, Celestia,
She whispered into the night.
let that be enough.
No, it's stupid. Please, Celestia, she whispered into the night. Let that be enough. Yes. Well, I'm significantly through the story. Alright, I'm gonna take a break. So yeah, the changeling is Russian. This is how the changeling sounds. It sounds exactly like this. With a terrible Russian accent. Alright, so I am a good way through the story. And I think the next part will probably be a bit longer than this, unless I do 3. I'm not exactly sure. I'll see what happens next time. And until then, you keep your faces looking pretty. I don't know what that means. Okay, goodbye, every pony. Goodbye.